Have you ever felt like your life was shaped long before you had any say in it? Maybe you keep falling into the same emotional patterns, feeling as if your path was already written, even as you fight to rewrite it. What if I told you that the month you were born in isn't just a date? It is a psychic imprint, a myth that lives within you. Carl Jung believed that time holds symbolic meaning, and that your birth moment is more than chance. It's a code to your transformation. That's what we'll explore in this video. The hidden meaning behind your birth month, and how uncovering it can awaken your true self. Your birth was not an accident. It was an archetypal emergence. Have you ever considered the possibility that the moment you were born was not a beginning, but a continuation? That your first breath wasn't random, but timed, like a seed falling into a precise crack in the earth, waiting for a specific season to sprout? Carl Jung believed that the self, the totality of who you are meant to become, is already present at birth, hidden, silent, but alive. And with it, a symbolic code, carried not in your genetics, but in your psyche. Jung never spoke of birth as mere biology. He spoke of it as emergence, an archetypal event, where the soul enters form with a specific energetic signature. This is not about horoscopes or superstition. It is about symbolic timing. The psyche, Jung wrote, is structured like a drama. It unfolds in scenes, with characters, roles, masks, and every story has a point of entry. Your birth is that first scene, and it already whispers something about your arc, your strength, your fear, your mission, your shadow. But here's what no one told you, that this code, this mythic signature, was never meant to bind you. It was meant to awaken you. Just like an acorn carries the blueprint of an oak, you carry the energetic map of who you could become. But only if you choose to grow through it, not be imprisoned by it. The tragedy is that most people never question the invisible roles their birth imposes. They live out the scripts unconsciously: the good child, the black sheep, the savior, the disappointment. They don't realize they were reading from a page that was handed to them the day they arrived. Jung insisted, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And this is where the code becomes dangerous, because what starts as archetype can harden into identity. You begin to mistake the conditions of your arrival for the truth of your being. Were you born into silence, into chaos, into waiting, into pressure? Whatever the psychic atmosphere, it left its fingerprints on you, and if you don't trace them back, you will keep mistaking that imprint for your nature. To be born with a code is not to be born in chains. It is to be born into a symbolic field that you are meant to navigate, decode, and transcend. Your individuation begins when you stop asking, "Why am I like this?" and start asking, "What was the story I entered into, and what will I do with it now?" The code is not your identity, it's your initiation. And now that you see it, the real journey begins. You didn't just arrive, you were summoned. What if your soul chose its moment of entry with precision? What if your birth wasn't random, but resonant, an echo of something greater aligning itself through you? Jung believed that time is not only chronological, it is psychological, symbolic, and deeply alive. This means that the moment of your birth may contain more than a date. It may carry intention, not from fate but from the self. To Jung, the self is the totality of who you are, both conscious and unconscious. It is the blueprint of your wholeness, waiting to unfold. And it does not emerge in a vacuum. It waits, it watches, it chooses. In ancient thought, this was known as kairos, not clock time, but the right time, the opportune moment when something is meant to be born. Your arrival into this world may have been such a moment. Not because the stars aligned in superstition, but because something inside you aligned with the world. There are people who carry the silent sense that they arrived too early or too late, that life was already happening before they could make sense of it, that they missed something essential. Maybe that's you. But what if the truth is not that you were misplaced, but that you've never been taught how to interpret your own arrival? What if the psychic climate of your birth, the season, the atmosphere, the mood, wasn't just environmental but symbolic? Jung taught that the soul is shaped by symbols long before it is shaped by language. The images, energies, and archetypes active at the time of your birth form part of your inner myth. These are not rational elements. They are psychic ones. They live in the background, influencing your perception of time, struggle, identity. If you were born into a winter of silence, perhaps you've always felt a longing for warmth. If you arrived in a season of expansion, maybe your soul still fears contraction. These themes are not coincidences. They are clues. But here's the danger. If you never become aware of this timing, you may live your life in resistance to it, always trying to escape the season you were born into. Psychologically, emotionally, even spiritually. Jung would call this a split between ego and self. The ego wants to control time, the self works with it, and until those two align, you will always feel out of rhythm. You must begin to ask, what kind of world was I born into, and what myth was I born from? You must dare to look at your own beginning not as a point on a timeline, but as the echo of a calling. Your soul arrived exactly when it was meant to, not for comfort, but for evolution. The timing of your birth is not your prison, it is your portal. And once you stop resisting it, once you begin to listen to what it reflects, you will understand. You were not just born into time. Time was born into you. You are already inside a story. But is it yours? Long before you could speak, before you could choose, you were already inside a narrative. A myth unfolding around you, composed of roles, expectations, silences, and energies too subtle to name but too powerful to ignore. Jung believed that each of us unconsciously lives out a mythic pattern, a script rooted not only in our family or culture, but in the collective unconscious. The danger is not that we have a myth. The danger is that we don't know which myth we're in. Look closely at your life. The repeating themes, the roles you always find yourself cast in, the emotions that keep circling back, no matter how many decisions you make to change. These are not accidents. These are mythic echoes. Maybe you've always felt like the rescuer, or the one who must be perfect, or invisible, or needed. These identities seem like choices, but Jung would argue otherwise. They are stories we inherited, often at birth, and silently agreed to live out. But here is the question that burns beneath it all. What if the story you've been living is not truly yours? What if it was assigned to you, by your environment, by unconscious projections, by ancestors who never finished their own story? Your birth moment, your symbolic beginning, may have placed you in the middle of a myth already in motion. And because you had no words, no defenses, no way to resist, your psyche absorbed it as reality. Jung spoke often of the symbolic life, the ability to view your inner world not as chaos or confusion, but as a meaningful pattern. To see your anxiety not as a flaw, but as a message. To see your trauma not as punishment, but as a mythic wound. And most importantly, to realize that every character you play in life was given to you, but you don't have to keep playing it. The turning point comes when you ask, whose story is this? The pain you feel when you betray yourself, that is not a weakness. It is the moment the false myth starts to crack. When you feel torn between who you are and who you were taught to be, you are standing at the edge of individuation. And the path is not to destroy the old myth, but to step out of it, consciously, to write a new one that begins with you. You are not just the product of your circumstances, you are the author in waiting of your life's meaning. But before you can write a new story, you must become aware of the one you're unconsciously repeating. That is the moment myth becomes mirror, and the mirror becomes a door. Because until you name the myth, it will name you. Time is not linear. It speaks in symbols. You were taught to see time as a straight line. Seconds become minutes, minutes become years. But the psyche doesn't follow clocks. It moves in circles, echoes, and archetypes. Carl Jung understood this deeply. The unconscious doesn't speak in language, but in symbols, and the month of your birth, seemingly a mundane timestamp, is one such symbol, a portal encoded with meaning, not for the intellect to dissect, but for the soul to interpret. Think of the unconscious like a dream. Its truth is hidden, but not absent. It appears in images, sensations, metaphors. Jung taught that these symbols are the native language of the psyche. The mistake modern life makes is to strip everything of meaning, to flatten time into a number, to erase mystery from rhythm. But your birth was not mechanical. It was mythic, and the time you arrived carries symbols that have shaped you, even if you've never noticed. Maybe you were born in darkness, under long nights and still air, or in a season of bloom and loud celebration. It doesn't matter whether you remember it. The psyche remembers. Your inner world may still echo with that atmosphere. Quietness, intensity, change, restlessness. This isn't spiritual fluff. It's psychological gravity. Jung called it participation mystique, the state in which the individual is unconsciously fused with the surrounding symbolic field. You didn't just arrive in time. You absorbed it. You became part of it. And what does that mean? It means your moods may carry the texture of that timing. Your instincts may mirror that season's archetype. The world you were born into wrote symbols on the walls of your inner life, symbols you keep walking past without realizing they're re-speaking. That heaviness you feel, that strange urgency, that recurring dream, all symbolic, all messages, all missed when you insist on living only logically. Jung warned us, when symbols are ignored, they become symptoms. When the soul is not heard, it screams through anxiety, depression, stagnation. You were not meant to ignore the poetic structure of your own story. You were meant to decode it. Because once you see time as symbolic, your own patterns begin to make sense. Your timing, your struggles, your desires, they're not random. They're messages. And here lies the invitation, to stop asking what your birth month means in general, and start asking what it means in your symbolic language. What part of you was born that day? What pattern began? What did life seem to want from you? Not from the world, but from your unconscious. Because once you begin to listen to time as a symbol, you no longer live on a flat surface. You begin to inhabit your myth. You don't just live in time. Time lives in you, and it has been trying to speak. You were born into emotion, not just a family. You didn't just inherit eye color or blood type. You inherited energy, invisible, unspoken, unresolved. Jung taught that every child is born into a psychic field, and this field is saturated with the emotions that the family, the culture, and even the generation before you refuse to feel. You didn't choose it, but you absorbed it. Maybe you were born into anxiety that had no name, into grief that was never grieved, into pressure to perform, to please, to redeem something that didn't start with you. The psyche of the newborn is porous. It takes in everything, not through language, but through vibration. Before you had words, you had resonance, and the emotional climate surrounding your birth left an imprint. This is your emotional blueprint, not the one you consciously built, but the one your nervous system memorized before you could resist. This is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. Jung referred to this inheritance as the family shadow, the unacknowledged content passed from generation to generation, not genetically but psychically. It shows up as unconscious loyalties, the need to suffer like your mother, the fear of success because your father never had it, the silence you carry because someone before you never got to speak. These are not just traumas, they are contracts. You didn't sign them, but you've been keeping them alive. Your birth moment may have aligned with a rupture in your family story, an illness, a loss, a transition. And unconsciously, you took on a role. The fixer, the golden child, the invisible one. not because it was true, but because the system required it. And your identity began to wrap itself around that need. What you now call your personality may, in truth, be your earliest coping strategy. But here is the most painful part. You think it's you. You think your emotional patterns are who you are. Jung would call this identification with the complex, a fusion between yourself and an inherited wound. And as long as you remain fused, you cannot grow. Because what you inherited is not your fault, but repeating it is no longer innocent. So how do you break the cycle? By bringing it to light. By asking not what is wrong with me, but what pain am I carrying that isn't mine? Healing doesn't mean rejecting your family. It means refusing to carry what they couldn't. It means choosing to feel what no one else would feel, to speak what no one else dared say. And that choice, though lonely, is liberation. You cannot rewrite the conditions of your birth, but you can choose what you do with the energy it left inside you. That is where Jung places the power, not in forgetting the past, but in confronting it consciously. Because once you recognize the blueprint, you can draw something new. You were born into emotion. Now it's time to own what you'll do with it. Each soul arrives in a specific psychic climate. We often speak of birth as if it happens only in the external world, in a hospital room, a home, under a certain sky. But Jung would urge us to look deeper. He'd say, what was the inner season of your arrival? Not the weather, the psychic atmosphere, the mood of the soul. Because you were not just born into a calendar, you were born into a climate of consciousness. And whether it was summer or winter outside, your psyche registered something far more profound, a texture, a rhythm, a psychic tone. Maybe your season was silence. Maybe it was chaos. Maybe it was full of unspoken expectations or fractured relationships. Or maybe it was peace, and you've spent your whole life trying to recreate that sanctuary. The soul remembers. It absorbs the emotional weather of your first days, your first weeks, your first environment. This becomes your baseline, your normal. But what happens when that normal was built on dysfunction? Jung wrote that what is unconscious in the beginning becomes destiny later on. If the climate of your arrival was heavy, anxious, or erratic, that pattern may now live inside you, not as memory, but as instinct. You expect instability. You anticipate loss. You unconsciously recreate the temperature of your origin, because on some level, that is what safety has become to your nervous system. But here's the twist. What you adapted to is not the same as who you are. Adaptation is not identity. And many of your deepest traits may be echoes of that first season, not choices, but survival strategies. If you were born into coldness, you may now seek warmth in others with desperation. If you were born into overstimulation, you may now crave stillness but panic when you get it. The psyche is not linear. It loops. This is why Jung emphasized individuation, the process of becoming distinct from what shaped you. Because you were meant to carry awareness, not repetition. And this awareness begins with naming the psychic season of your birth. What was the emotional atmosphere? What wasn't allowed to be felt? What role were you cast into before you could speak? And perhaps the most painful question, what part of you had to go dormant in order to survive that season? The good news is this: no season lasts forever. Your inner climate can change, but only if you step outside of the weather system you inherited. You do this by becoming conscious of it, by realizing that the tension you feel, the fatigue you carry, the walls you build, they all served a purpose once, but they no longer serve you. To become whole is not to erase the season of your birth. It is to stand in it, fully awake, and choose how to live forward. The past is the soil, the self is the seed, and your awareness is the sun that makes everything new. You orbit something you don't even know is there. There is a silent pull in your life, a pattern so familiar, so consistent, that you mistake it for personality. But it's not who you are. It's what you orbit. Carl Jung believed that each of us carries a psychic nucleus, formed by the unresolved energy of our early life, and that this core exerts a gravitational pull on our thoughts, choices, and relationships. Most people never see it. They just call it the way things are. But what if what feels normal is actually repetition? This gravitational pull often begins at birth, not in the literal event, but in the emotional and energetic conditions surrounding it. You may have been born into abandonment, and now you seek constant validation. You may have been born into chaos, and now you cling to control. You may have been born into invisibility, and now you perform for love. These patterns feel personal, but they are psychic imprints, set in motion by timing, and sustained by unconscious loyalty to what shaped you. Jung warned that without awareness, this gravity becomes fate. You will keep revolving around the same emotional sun, mistaking the heat for meaning. You'll date the same person with a different face. You'll sabotage new beginnings just before they take root. You'll accidentally find yourself in the same emotional corner over and over again. This is not coincidence. It is inner orbit. But there is a deeper truth. What you orbit is also orbiting you. That unresolved emotion, that early psychic event, is not just pulling you, it's asking to be seen. The patterns are not punishments, they're signals, and every loop is a message. Wake up. Look deeper. This isn't who you are. It's who you became to survive. To escape this gravitational field, you must name its source. Was it a moment of helplessness? A gaze that never met yours? A tension in the room that your body absorbed before you had language to describe it? This isn't about memory. It's about energetic truth. Your psyche still dances around a center it hasn't questioned. Until you do, you will live reactively, spinning instead of choosing. But here's the good news. Gravity can be transcended. And the first step is observation. Jung called this the transcendent function, the moment when awareness meets pattern and something new is born. You don't break free by force. You shift the center. You stop orbiting the moment you realize, I am not the pain. I am the witness of the pain, and I choose another path. You are not a satellite. You are a sun. And the moment you remember that, everything begins to move around you. You were born into expectations, spoken and unspoken. Before you spoke your first word, you agreed to things you didn't understand. Not out loud, not in writing, but psychically. You agreed to carry pain that wasn't yours, to fulfill roles no one dared claim, to absorb tension that no one around you could name. Jung would call this unconscious identification, the moment your self fuses with the emotional needs of your environment. And so, without knowing it, you signed your first contract. I'll be what they need if it keeps me safe. But safety, in the unconscious, often comes at the cost of authenticity. Maybe your contract was to be the strong one, the responsible one, the silent one, the success story, the peacemaker, the one who never complains. These roles become invisible scripts. They shape your thoughts, guide your choices, punish your desires. And the worst part? You think it's who you are, but it's not. It's who you had to be. Carl Jung understood that these contracts are often inherited. They aren't created by logic. They're transmitted by silence, glances, tensions in the room, expectations soaked into the walls. You felt them before you could name them. And you agreed, because agreement meant belonging. Agreement meant survival. But now, years later, the cost is heavy. You feel guilt when you rest, shame when you say no, panic when you disappoint someone. You stretch yourself thin, not because you're generous, but because your worth was tied to sacrifice. You smile, not because you're happy, but because you're terrified of becoming a burden. This is not kindness, it's contract, and it's killing yourself. Jung would say, what you repress does not disappear, it becomes fate. Every contract you uphold in silence becomes a law in your unconscious. Until you revoke it, it will rule you, and revoking it is painful, because it means betrayal, not of others, but of the false self you constructed to keep others comfortable. It means no longer playing the part. It means risking rejection in order to find your real face. So ask yourself, what role did I sign up for? What pain have I been carrying that never belonged to me? And more importantly, who would I be without this role? The truth is, your soul was never meant to live under silent obligation. You were not born to complete your parents' unfinished story, to heal the wounds they refused to confront, or to be the emotional container for their unresolved shadow. You are allowed to break the contract. You are allowed to say, I no longer agree. Because individuation, as Jung taught, is not rebellion, it's return. A return to what is essential, what is real, what is you. And sometimes that return begins with a simple but terrifying act, putting down what was never yours to carry. You were born whole. The contracts came later. It's time to tear them up. When your arrival felt wrong, you built a persona. Some people feel out of place the moment they arrive, not because they were unwanted in words, but because the environment didn't know how to receive them. The timing was off, too early, too late, too inconvenient. And though no one may have said it, the message landed. You are too much. Or worse, you are not enough. Jung would call this the moment the persona begins. The persona is the mask we build to survive the gap between who we are and what the world allows us to be. If your birth moment collided with grief, stress, shame, or silence, your psyche likely built a mask to compensate. A mask of perfection, of indifference, of helpfulness, of invisibility. You became who they needed at the cost of who you were. The tragedy? You forgot it was a mask. Jung warned that the danger of the persona isn't that we use it, it's that we become it. And the longer we wear it, the more disconnected we feel. You smile while you suffocate. You succeed while you secretly collapse. You care for everyone while no one sees you. And beneath it all is a question you were afraid to ask. What if they only love the mask? When your birth moment is distorted by emotional rejection or psychic neglect, you adapt through performance. The world gives you applause, and you confuse it for love. You gather achievements and attention, but each victory feels hollow. Because the mask can win the world, but it cannot feed the soul. But here's the thing. The persona is not evil. It was protection. It kept you safe. Jung honored it as a necessary phase. The problem is when it becomes permanent, when the performance replaces presence. You were never meant to live behind it. You were meant to grow beyond it. So how do you begin? By acknowledging the wound that required the mask in the first place. The shame, the fear, the silence. You don't have to relive it, but you do have to name it. Because only then can you say, I wore this to survive, but I'm not here to survive anymore. This is the birth of the true self. Not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. It's the moment you stop apologizing for your timing. Stop shrinking to fit. Stop adjusting your aliveness to avoid rejection. The mask begins to crack. And in the space between the pieces, you begin to breathe. Jung would say that the shadow is not the enemy. It is the gateway. When your birth became a burden, your shadow became a sanctuary. But now it's time to step out. To remember that you were not born too early or too late. You were born exactly when you were meant to be. Not to wear a mask, but to become a mirror for truth. Every symbolic beginning includes pain. Every soul enters this world through friction between what is and what longs to be. And in that crossing, something is lost. Safety, innocence, wholeness. Jung understood this. Every transformation is preceded by a wound. Your birth was not just an emergence, it was a rupture. And within that rupture lies your first psychic scar. Not because life meant to harm you, but because becoming conscious requires contrast. You were torn from unity to begin the journey toward individuation. This is what we call the origin wound, the psychic imprint left by the moment your being collided with the world. For some, it's the wound of abandonment. For others, rejection, emotional coldness, overstimulation, or suffocation. You may not remember it, but your body does. Your nervous system does. Your patterns certainly do. Because this wound becomes the blueprint for how you love, how you trust, how you protect yourself from the very intimacy you crave. The tragedy isn't the wound itself. It is the way you've learned to hide it. You built identities to cover it. You developed logic to outthink it. You adopted spirituality to bypass it. But Jung would gently tell you, the wound is not the enemy, it's the portal. What hurts the most often reveals what is most sacred. Think about your deepest suffering, the themes that repeat. The kind of pain that feels too familiar, as if life keeps circling back to remind you of something. That's not coincidence. That's the unconscious asking for integration. Because what is not healed is not buried. It's broadcast. You draw toward you people and situations that echo the original pain, hoping unconsciously to rewrite the ending. But there is no healing through repetition. There is only healing through awareness. You must stop running, stop numbing, stop blaming. The origin wound isn't here to define you, it's here to refine you. And once you face it, you'll discover a secret. Within the wound is a key, a unique power, a sharp clarity, a hidden strength that could never have emerged without the break. The one who was abandoned becomes the one who holds space. The one who was silenced becomes the voice of truth. The one who was unseen becomes the witness to others' pain. But only if the wound is confronted, not worn like an identity. Jung taught that suffering opens the path to meaning. The scar is not just a sign of what hurt you. It is the place where light now enters. You are not broken, you are initiated. And your task is not to erase the wound, but to claim its wisdom, to realize that your most painful beginning was also your sacred instruction. Because within your origin wound lies your sacred task, not to be healed from it, but to be born through it. You don't need to erase the past, you need to outgrow it. There comes a moment in every inner journey when the pain is no longer the enemy, but the teacher. When the question shifts from, why did this happen to me, to who am I now because of it? This is the moment Jung called the beginning of individuation, the sacred process of becoming who you truly are, not who the world trained you to be. Individuation is not healing in the way most people imagine. It's not about becoming perfect or endlessly analyzing your wounds. It's not about fixing yourself to be acceptable. It's about integration, wholeness. It is the alchemical act of bringing light to your shadow, calling your projections back home, and stepping beyond the roles that once defined you. It's not self-improvement. It's self-return. You've lived your whole life inside a story, shaped by your birth, your environment, your inherited patterns. You've played the character well, the achiever, the giver, the forgiver, the survivor. But you've begun to sense something. The story is too small. You are outgrowing it, and now the walls begin to crack. Not because life is breaking you, but because your old identity can no longer contain your becoming. This is what Jung meant when he said, "We must let go of the life we have planned, so as to accept the one that is waiting for us." And that means risking the unknown, leaving behind the security of being the good one, the needed one, the quiet one. It means letting the false self die, and that death is terrifying, because we confuse roles with survival. But the truth is, the role kept you safe, but it never made you whole. To individuate is to step into your own center, to stop orbiting others' expectations, to listen, finally, to the quiet truth within you that has been whispering all along. You are not here to play a part. You are here to become real. And it's not an easy path. You will be misunderstood. You will disappoint those who benefited from your inauthenticity. You will grieve the version of you that was shaped by survival. But you will breathe again. You will feel joy that is not dependent on performance. You will meet yourself, not as a reflection, but as a presence, as someone rooted, whole, and real. Jung taught that individuation is not isolation, it's inner alignment. The moment your thoughts, your emotions, your instincts, and your actions begin to speak the same language, you stop splitting, you stop betraying yourself to belong. You belong deeply to your own being. You don't need to rewrite your past. You only need to stop repeating it. Because becoming stronger than the story is not about forgetting, it's about transcending. You are not the wound. You are the one who chose to walk through it. And now, you are almost home. You were born once into the world. Now you must be born into yourself. There is a birth that no one sees. A moment quieter than your first breath, but far more powerful. It doesn't happen in a hospital or under a certain sky. It happens in silence, when the illusions fall away, when the stories lose their hold, when you finally see yourself, fully, without distortion, for the very first time. This is the second birth, the symbolic rebirth. And Jung would tell you, this is where life truly begins. Because the first birth gave you a body, but the second gives you a center. Everything you've faced, the inherited roles, the psychic patterns, the unconscious contracts, the shadow, the wound, it all brought you to this threshold. Not to be destroyed, but to be revealed. And here is what is revealed. You are not your trauma. Not your timing, not your past. You are consciousness. And consciousness changes everything. When you see, you stop repeating. When you understand, you stop reacting. When you remember, you stop abandoning yourself. This is the quiet power of awareness. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand. It simply notices. And in that noticing, the patterns begin to dissolve, not because you fought them, but because you outgrew them. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The work is not to become someone else. It is to return to who you were before the masks, before the fears, before the world trained you to forget. Because underneath all of it, yourself has always been waiting, not to be created, but to be uncovered. This is the true meaning of your birth month. Not the date, not the stars, the symbol, the imprint, the atmosphere your soul chose as its doorway. Not because it was easy, but because it carried exactly what your evolution required. You weren't born to escape it. You were born to transform through it. And now, you're no longer sleepwalking through a script. You are aware. You see the blueprint. You feel the shift. And the power that once belonged to everyone else, their expectations, their stories, their needs, returns to you, quietly, fully, without asking for permission. This is rebirth. And it's not loud. It doesn't need applause. It simply feels like peace, like alignment, like presence. You are no longer the child of circumstance. You are the architect of meaning. And that changes everything. And don't forget, the next video is also part of this journey. It's important. You need to keep going. Real transformation only begins when you don't stop at the first step. See you there.